the Roman army's most brutal ambushes in history. The morning mist clung to the Germanic forests as 20,000 Roman soldiers marched confidently through the narrow forest paths. These weren't just any troops. They were Rome's finest legions, veterans of countless victories, armed with the weapons and tactics that had conquered most of the known world. In just a few hours, every single one of them would be dead. Welcome back to Chapters in History. I'm your host, and today we're diving into the darkest chapters of Roman military history. The ambushes that shattered Rome's myth of invincibility. If you're new here and love exploring history's most dramatic military disasters, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the past. The Roman Empire was built on the backs of its legions, disciplined, professional armies that seemed unstoppable in open battle. But there was one type of warfare that could neutralize Rome's advantages: the perfectly executed ambush. Today, we're exploring the most brutal and devastating surprise attacks that caught Rome's eagles off guard. From the forests of Germany to the deserts of Africa. These are just stories of military defeats. They're tales of how cunning, local knowledge, and perfect timing could destroy armies that had never known defeat. Prepare yourself, because these ambushes didn't just kill soldiers, they changed the course of history. Chapter 1. The TEUTOBURG Forest, Rome's greatest nightmare. September 9th, 9 CE. 3 Roman legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were marching through the dense forests of northern Germany under the command of Publius Quintilius Varus. They trusted their Germanic guide, a man named Arminius, who had served in the Roman auxiliary forces and earned Roman citizenship through his loyal service. Arminius was leading them into the most devastating ambush in Roman history. The TEUTOBURG Forest Massacre wasn't just a military defeat, it was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy that had been years in the making. Arminius, known to his own people as Hermann, had spent years pretending to be a loyal Roman ally, while secretly organizing a coalition of Germanic tribes for this moment. The ambush location was chosen with deadly precision. The forest paths were narrow, forcing the Romans to march in a long, vulnerable column. The dense trees made it impossible for the legions to form their traditional battle formations, while the muddy ground from autumn rains slowed their movement to a crawl. When the attack began, it came from everywhere at once. Germanic warriors emerged from behind trees, from hidden pits, from elevated positions the Romans couldn't reach. They used the forest like a weapon, turning every tree into cover and every path into a killing ground. The Romans tried to fight, but their advantages had been stripped away. Their famous testudo or turtle formation was useless in the dense forest. Their cavalry couldn't maneuver. Their artillery was trapped in the baggage train. For 3 days, the Germanic forces picked apart the Roman column piece by piece. By the end, 20,000 Roman soldiers lay dead. 3 entire legions, elite units with centuries of history, were completely destroyed. Varus himself fell on his sword rather than face capture, and his head was sent to Germanic chieftains as a trophy. The psychological impact on Rome was devastating. Emperor Augustus reportedly beat his head against walls, crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." The numbers of the destroyed legions, 17, 18, and 19, were never used again in Roman military history, as if the very digits were cursed. But the most chilling detail comes from 6 years later, when Roman forces finally returned to the battlefield. They found the remains still scattered throughout the forest, skulls nailed to trees, altars where Roman officers had been sacrificed to Germanic gods, and graffiti mocking Roman power carved into the bark of ancient oaks. Chapter 2. The Caudine Forks, when strategy trumped strength. Long before the disaster in Germania, Rome learned a painful lesson about the dangers of overconfidence in the narrow mountain passes of southern Italy. The year was 321 BCE, and Rome was locked in a bitter war with the Samnite tribes for control of central Italy. The Roman consuls Spurius Postumius and Titus Veturius were leading their armies to relieve the besieged city of Luceria when Samnite messengers intercepted them with urgent news. A large Samnite force was about to attack the Roman territory of Campania, leaving their own lands defensively weak. It was exactly what the Romans wanted to hear. Instead of taking the longer but safer coastal route, they decided to march directly through the Apennine Mountains via a pass called the CAUDINE Forks, a narrow valley surrounded by steep hills that the Samnites supposedly couldn't defend. It was a trap. The Samnite general Gaius Pontius had orchestrated the entire deception. The messengers were fake, the intelligence was fabricated, and the undefended pass was actually a carefully prepared killing ground. When the Roman army entered the narrow valley, they found the exit blocked by massive tree trunks and stone barriers. Trapped like animals in a cage, the Romans discovered that every hillside around them bristled with Samnite warriors. But Pontius didn't want to simply massacre the Roman army. He wanted to humiliate Rome itself. For hours, the Romans tried to break out, throwing themselves against the barriers while Samnite spears and arrows rained down from above. But the pass was too narrow for their superior numbers to matter, and the terrain made their tactical advantages worthless. Finally, facing complete annihilation, the Roman commanders agreed to negotiate. What happened next became one of the most shameful moments in Roman military history. The entire Roman army, both consuls, all the officers, and thousands of legionnaires, were forced to pass under a symbolic yoke made of Samnite spears, acknowledging their complete submission to their enemies. The Romans returned to their city, stripped of weapons, armor, and dignity. The humiliation was so complete that Rome spent the next decade planning revenge, eventually crushing the Samnites so thoroughly that their civilization never recovered. Chapter 3. CARRHAE, Death in the Desert. The year was 53 BCE, and Rome's richest man was about to lead 7 legions to their destruction in the deserts of Mesopotamia. Marcus Licinius Crassus, seeking military glory to match his wealth, had launched an invasion of the Parthian Empire without the Senate's approval and against the advice of his more experienced generals. Crassus believed Roman discipline and heavy infantry would easily overcome what he saw as lightly armed barbarian horsemen. He was catastrophically wrong. The Parthian general Shaurena had prepared an ambush that exploited every weakness in Roman tactics. Rather than meeting the Romans in a pitched battle, he lured them deep into the desert, where the harsh sun and lack of water would weaken them before the real fighting began. When the battle started, the Romans found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered. The Parthians attacked in waves. First, their light cavalry peppered the Roman formations with arrows. Then their heavily armored cataphracts charged the weakened lines. Then they withdrew before the Romans could respond effectively. The Roman testudo formation, normally impregnable, became a death trap in the desert heat. Soldiers collapsed from exhaustion inside their shield walls, while Parthian arrows found every gap in their armor. Worse still, the Parthians had solved the problem of ammunition. They brought a massive baggage train loaded with arrows, allowing them to maintain their barrage for hours. Crassus tried every tactical innovation he could think of. He sent his cavalry to break up the Parthian formations, only to watch them be surrounded and destroyed. He ordered his son Publius to lead a desperate charge with the Gallic cavalry, but Publius was killed, and his head was later used to mock the Roman army. The most brutal moment came when the Parthians displayed Publius's severed head on a spear, within sight of his father. Crassus, watching his son's head being paraded by enemy cavalry, reportedly broke down completely and lost all ability to command his army. By the end of the day, Crassus was dead, killed during a supposed negotiation meeting. 20,000 Roman soldiers lay scattered across the desert, and another 10,000 were marched into captivity, many never to be seen again. The Parthians reportedly poured molten gold down Crassus's throat after his death, mocking his legendary greed. His severed head was later used as a prop in a theatrical performance for the Parthian king, the ultimate humiliation for a man who had dreamed of matching Caesar's military genius. Chapter 4. The Battle of the Silver Shields, Betrayal, and Massacre. Not all devastating ambushes came from foreign enemies. Sometimes Rome's greatest disasters came from within, when trusted allies turned into deadly enemies. This was the lesson learned in 88 BC, in Asia Minor, when King Mithridates VI of Pontus orchestrated one of history's most successful acts of genocide against Roman citizens. Mithridates had been planning his revenge against Rome for years, building a network of spies and sympathizers throughout the Roman provinces of Asia. He convinced local Greek cities that Rome was weak, that their taxes were unbearable, and that liberation was possible if they acted together. The signal came on a predetermined day. Across dozens of cities simultaneously, local populations rose up and began systematically murdering every Roman citizen they could find. Men, women, children, slaves, anyone connected to Roman rule was targeted for death. The massacre wasn't random violence. It was a coordinated military operation, disguised as popular uprising. Mithridates had identified Roman garrisons, supply depots, and administrative centers, then provided local conspirators with the intelligence needed to strike them simultaneously. In Ephesus, Roman citizens fled to the temple of Artemis seeking sanctuary, only to be dragged from the altar and butchered. In Pergamon, Roman tax collectors were thrown from the city walls. In Adramyttium, Roman children were killed in front of their parents before the adults themselves were executed. The most shocking aspect was how completely Roman intelligence had failed. Roman governors received no warning, Roman spies detected no conspiracy, and Roman allies provided no advance notice. In a single day, an estimated 80,000 Roman citizens were murdered across Asia Minor. The psychological impact was devastating. Rome had always believed that its citizens were safe throughout the empire, protected by the fear of Roman retaliation. The Asian Vespers, as historians called the massacre, showed that Rome's enemies could reach Roman civilians anywhere, and that local populations might secretly hate their Roman rulers. When news reached Rome, the city went into mourning. Families who had relatives in Asia Minor assumed they were dead, and they were usually right. The massacre became a rallying cry for Roman revenge, eventually leading to years of brutal warfare that devastated the eastern Mediterranean. Chapter 5. The disaster at Ad Decimo, when veterans became victims. Even in the later empire, when Rome's military had centuries of experience dealing with ambush tactics, overconfidence could still lead to disaster. In 533 CE, the Eastern Roman Empire was attempting to reconquer North Africa from the Vandals, and General Belisarius was leading what seemed like an unstoppable force toward Carthage. The Vandal king Gelimer decided to stake everything on a single, perfectly coordinated ambush at a place called Ad Decimum, 10 miles from Carthage. Rather than face the Romans in open battle, where their superior discipline would dominate, Gelimer planned to attack the Roman column from 3 directions simultaneously, using the element of surprise to negate Roman tactical advantages. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Gelimer's brother Amatus would attack the Roman vanguard from the front. Gelimer himself would strike the main column from the flank, and his nephew Gibamund would attack the rearguard from behind. The Romans would be surrounded, confused, and destroyed before they could organize an effective defense. Initially, the ambush worked perfectly. Amatus smashed into the Roman vanguard, creating chaos and confusion in the Roman ranks. Soldiers who had expected an easy march to Carthage suddenly found themselves fighting for their lives against an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere. But then, the plan began to unravel in ways that show how ambushes can backfire spectacularly. Amatus, carried away by his initial success, pushed too far forward and was killed by Roman cavalry. When his men saw their leader fall, they panicked and retreated. Gelimer, arriving to find his brother dead and his men in flight, became so overwhelmed with grief that he stopped fighting to mourn over the corpse. This gave Belisarius time to rally his troops and turn the tables on the ambushers. By the end of the day, the Vandal army was shattered, and Gelimer was fleeing toward the desert. The ambush that should have saved Vandal Africa instead hastened its destruction, showing that even perfect tactical plans can fail when human emotions overwhelm military discipline. Final chapter. The lessons of ambush warfare. These brutal ambushes reveal something crucial about the nature of military power and imperial overconfidence. Rome's legions were nearly invincible in conventional warfare, but they were vulnerable to enemies who refused to fight on Roman terms. The most successful ambushes combined several key elements: superior knowledge of local terrain, careful intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, and most importantly, the ability to choose when and where to fight. Whether in Germanic forests, Italian mountain passes, or Mesopotamian deserts, Rome's enemies succeeded when they forced battles under conditions that neutralized Roman advantages. But these disasters also show Rome's remarkable resilience. After every catastrophic ambush, Rome rebuilt, learned from its mistakes, and usually returned stronger than before. The TEUTOBURG forest led to better intelligence networks. CARRHAE taught Rome to respect Parthian tactics. Even the Asian Vespers ultimately strengthened Roman control over the eastern provinces. Perhaps most importantly, these ambushes remind us that military superiority is never permanent. Every empire, no matter how powerful, faces enemies who understand its weaknesses and are willing to exploit them. Rome's greatest defeats came not from superior enemy forces, but from superior enemy thinking. The legions that marched confidently into these killing grounds believed they were invincible. Their enemies proved that overconfidence, more than any weapon, could destroy even the mightiest army. If this exploration of Rome's military disasters has fascinated you, hit that like button and subscribe to Chapters in History for more deep dives into history's most dramatic battles. Which of these ambushes shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring the chapters that shaped our world, especially the ones that showed even empires have limits.